The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Here is what the history books get wrong. They say Voldemort died on October 31st, 1981. They say a curse rebounded, a body crumbled, and the Dark Lord ceased. They say a baby was found in the rubble, alive and marked, and Hagrid collected him and delivered him to a house in Surrey where ordinary people would raise him into an ordinary boy who knew nothing. The books are wrong about all of it. Not the date, not the address, not even the curse. Wrong about what happened in the 6 seconds nobody watched. Godric's Hollow is quiet at midnight in late October. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, it's held, like breath before a verdict. Every curtain is drawn, which means that when the green light detonates inside the house at the end of the road, nobody sees it. Nobody sees James Potter fall in the doorway. Nobody sees Lily Potter stand between the crib and the wand. Nobody sees what happens after. The curse hits Harry James Potter at 12:03 am, bounces back in the way that curses are not supposed to bounce, and Voldemort's body destroys itself. The magical backlash is catastrophic. The house shudders. Part of the roof goes. A wall cracks from floor to ceiling. The baby screams. And the Wraith, the thing that was once the most powerful dark wizard in a century, now less than vapor, less than smoke. A torn fragment of a soul that should by rights be drifting toward oblivion, thinks, this is the part nobody accounts for. The part that changes everything. A Horcrux is a homing device. That is its most fundamental function. Beneath all the ritual and blood required to make one, at its core, a piece of a soul that wants to return. It seeks its maker. It seeks warmth, density, a place where it will not dissolve. What the fragment finds, when it turns its formless attention to the child in the smoking crib, is not what it expected. It finds a mirror. The soul already inside Harry Potter, young, unformed, burning with the density that comes from two extraordinarily powerful magical parents, recognizes the fragment, the way a lock recognizes the ridges of a keycut from its own mechanism. The killing curse, in the act of failing, has done something unprecedented. It has made the child resonant with the fragment, tuned them to the same frequency. The Wraith calculates. Albania is years of damp forest and small animals and borrowed forms. It knows exactly what that costs. Or, it can anchor here. 6 seconds. Then the fragment folds itself into the wound on the child's forehead like smoke pulled backward through a keyhole, and Harry Potter stops screaming, and the scar stops bleeding, and the Wraith is gone. Not destroyed. Not fled. Installed. Godric's Hollow, 12:14 am. Alistair Moody arrives 11 minutes later because Moody does not sleep during a war, and his magical eye catches the residue of a killing curse's discharge from half a mile away. He comes through the garden gate with his wand already drawn and sweeps the house in 4 minutes flat. James Potter in the doorway. Dead, Lily Potter at the foot of the crib. Dead, the crib, empty. He reads the room 3 times. Blood on the crib's wooden rail, the clear signature of rebounded killing curse magic spreading outward like fracture lines, a hole in the roof from the backlash. His eye sweeps for disillusioned figures, portkey residue, the shimmer of a disillusionment charm. Nothing. The room has been emptied by something his eye cannot name. In 14 years of cataloging exactly how the darkest practitioners in Britain operate, that is the most frightening sentence in the English language. He files his report at 2 am. Infant not located, scene consistent with killing curse rebound, Dark Lord's physical form destroyed. At the bottom, in his own shorthand, child taken by method unknown. Constant vigilance. Then, he stands in the October cold outside the wreckage of the house, and for the first time in 14 years, Alistair Moody does not know what comes next. Godric's Hollow, 12:09 am. She came through the smoke, while Moody was still in the garden. Bellatrix Lestrange, née Black, eldest daughter of Cygnus and Druella, trained since age 7 in magics the Hogwarts curriculum does not mention, and the ministry does not acknowledge, was 3 streets away when the curse rebounded. She felt it in the dark mark on her forearm, the brand going suddenly, terribly cold, the way a fire goes cold, not dimming, but extinguishing. She knew what that coldness meant. She came anyway. Not for James. Not for Lily. She came because the Dark Lord had spoken to her 3 days before this night, alone, which was itself significant, and told her something he had told no one else. Something about the child. Something about what failure, if it came, would require of her. She came because she had been given an instruction, and Bellatrix Lestrange has never in her life failed to execute one. The child is in the crib. Alive, the scar on his forehead is fresh, still raised, the skin around it faintly luminous with residual spell light. She lifts him, and he doesn't cry. He looks at her with eyes that are. She registers this without flinching. Because flinching is for people who have not been trained the way she has been trained. Too still. Too present for a 15-month-old. Something is looking out from behind them that is not entirely a child. There you are, Bellatrix says. Quiet. Almost gentle. Which is perhaps the most frightening tone in her considerable arsenal. He said, "You'd survive." I didn't believe him. The child wraps one small hand around her finger. She disapparates before Moody clears the front gate. Little Hangleton Riddle House, 1981. He will search for 6 months. The entire order will search. Dumbledore will search. The Ministry will open and quietly close 3 separate investigations, each one concluding with the same impossible answer. The Potter infant vanished from Godric's Hollow by means that leave no traceable magical signature. And there are no leads. The wizarding world decides, eventually, that the child died in the rubble. They hold a memorial the following spring, and carve 3 names on a stone. Someone writes beneath the smallest name, in fresh ink that hasn't faded yet, Harry James Potter. The boy who lived. Nobody corrects it. Nobody knows enough to correct it. In Little Hangleton, in a house that does not exist on any Ministry register, a child with a crescent scar and 2 old eyes sleeps in a room at the top of the stairs. His magic, even dormant, registers in the floorboards and the walls, a low, constant pressure, like a second heartbeat embedded in the house's foundations. Bellatrix stands in the doorway, watching him sleep. She is already planning the curriculum. Riddle House, Harry age 3. The first lesson Bellatrix teaches him is not a spell. It is a word. The word is consequence. Harry is 3 years old, standing in the corridor on the 2nd floor, and he has just caused the wallpaper to peel itself from the plaster in a 6-foot radius because Rodolphus raised his voice at dinner, and something in Harry's chest tightened, and the wall simply came apart. Not violently. The wallpaper unspooled in one continuous, deliberate motion, like something being unwrapped. Rodolphus stares at the bare plaster, then at the child, then at Bellatrix. Bellatrix looks at Harry. "Do you know what you just did?" she asks. "The wall came off," he says. He does not look frightened. He looks curious. The specific curiosity of someone who has just discovered a capability and is already wondering what else falls within its range. Yes, because you let your anger move through you without direction. Undirected magic is wasted magic. Wasted magic is a failure of will. She crouches to his eye level. Her eyes are entirely steady. "You will repair the wall. Then you will tell me what you should have done with the anger instead." He repairs the wall wandlessly. 4 attempts, 20 minutes. When it is done, the seam is slightly visible if you know where to look, but the intention is architecturally sound. Then he sits on the floor of the corridor and thinks. "Kept it," Harry says finally. "Until I needed it." She looks at him for a long moment. "Yes," she says, and stands. And that is the end of the first lesson. Riddle House, Harry, ages 3, 10. The curriculum that follows is not what anyone who knew Bellatrix before Azkaban would have predicted. They would have expected chaos, a dark arts education built on cruelty and spectacle, on the performance of power rather than its architecture. They would have been wrong. 12 years of Coldstone and Dementors and her own mind for company had stripped everything from her that was ever performative. What remained was essential Bellatrix, the part that was, underneath all the laughter and the wildness and the devotion. Brilliant, black. Trained since childhood in the oldest magical traditions available to one of the sacred 28. Language first. Latin. Not schoolroom Latin. Functional Latin. The Latin in which the oldest incantations are written, and from which their mechanisms can be deduced rather than memorized. By 4, Harry reads it with the ease of a native tongue. By 5, he is parsing the logic of curse construction, understanding not just what a spell does, but why the words make it do that. Magic is a language, rather than a collection of commands. Then, history. Black family history, which is a different thing entirely. The tapestry at Grimmauld Place, to which Bellatrix brings him twice yearly to read like a text, is 700 years of magical Britain in genealogical thread. She makes him trace every line, every alliance, every burning, every name that was erased and why. By 6, Harry knows the political architecture of the Sacred 28, as well as he knows which stairs creak and precisely where to stand to not be seen from a doorway. The magic comes last, not because it is least important, but because Bellatrix understands something she has never articulated aloud. The soul fragment in Harry is a second engine, and like all engines, it must be respected before it can be used. You do not throw a second engine into a machine without first understanding what the first engine is doing. You map the interaction, you find the resonance points, you build the infrastructure before you open the throttle. At 5, she hands him a wand from the Black family vault, 11 inches, blackthorn, dragon heartstring. Made in 1743 for a black ancestor whose name was burned from the tapestry before Bellatrix was born. She does not know his crimes. She knows the wand is still warm to the touch, 250 years later, which tells her everything she needs to know about the quality of his magical core. Harry picks it up and the room temperature drops 3 degrees. Not the ambient cold of a poorly cast shield charm. The cold of something ancient paying attention. He turns the wand over once, points it at the candle on the table, and it lights. He did not say a word. Riddlehouse, Harry, age 7 at 7. Thaddeus Roll makes the mistake that all 3 of the Death Eaters who rotate through Riddlehouse will eventually make. He raises his wand at Bellatrix during a disagreement about the training schedule, Rollo's word, delivered with the confidence of a man who has never been corrected by a 7-year-old. Harry is at the other end of the corridor. He is there, and then the wand is on the floor, and Rollo's wrist is bent at an angle wrists are not supposed to achieve. And Harry is standing 2 feet in front of him with his own wand loose at his side and an expression of complete calm. She is not a target, Harry says. You should know that. A pause, the tone someone might use to note that rain is expected on Thursday. You should also know that I remember everything. Every person who comes through this house. Everything they say. Everything they do. He picks up Rolle's wand from the floor. Holds it out. Rolle takes it with his uninjured hand. He requests a different assignment the following week. Rabastan sends a letter to the Dark Lord's vessel. The Dark Lord sends back 2 words. As expected. Riddlehouse, Harry, age 7. Bellatrix teaches Harry the Cruciatus at 7. Not the application. The theory. She draws the curse's mechanism on parchment the way a surgeon draws anatomy, mapping the nerve pathways it activates, and the points where precision diverges from blunt force. She makes him understand it as a system before he goes anywhere near its practice. When his explanation is technically accurate, but emotionally detached, describing the mechanism without accounting for the psychological impact on the target, she stops him. Again, this time include what it does to their mind, not their nerves. Their mind. Because here is what Azkaban taught Bellatrix that no classroom ever could. The body heals. Always, even from the worst things done to it, the body has a relentless, mindless insistence on continuity. It is the mind that keeps the record. It is the mind that, years later, in a quiet room with no threat present, still flinches at a particular quality of light. If you want to end a fight, damage the body. If you want to end a will, speak to the mind. Harry picks up the quill and adds 3 annotations she has not included. Pressure points where the nerve clusters are densest, where minimum application of the curse would produce maximum psychological effect. Bellatrix looks at the additions. Where did you learn that? She asks. He has been considering this question, in various forms, for most of his conscious life, the moments when he knows things he was not taught, when information surfaces from somewhere beneath memory, already present and organized. "I don't know," he says. "I just know it." She rolls the parchment carefully, ties it, sets it with the others. Her back is to him. "Keep it," she says. "Whatever that is. However it comes to you. That is his gift to you. Do not waste it." Harry looks at his hands. Small still. The scar is silver in the lamplight. He does not ask whose gift she means. He already knows. Hammersmith, London, November 1988. Hermione Granger finds magic in a library, which is where she finds everything that matters. She is 8 years old, reading a book on ancient Celtic ritual practice that nobody has checked out since 1974, and on page 211 there is a paragraph about sympathetic resonance. The idea that certain people carry a frequency that interacts with the world in ways conventional physics cannot account for. And something in Hermione's chest locks into place like a bolt sliding home. She reads the paragraph 4 times, takes out her notebook, she is never without her notebook, and writes at the top of a fresh page, "If magic is real, what are the rules?" She fills 11 pages before the library closes. The owl arrives 6 weeks before her 11th birthday. She reads the letter once, sets it down and says, with the calm of someone receiving confirmation of a hypothesis rather than news, "I thought so." Her parents, Daniel Granger, dentist, a man of formidable patience and genuine intellectual curiosity, and Jean Granger, also a dentist, a woman who has always suspected her daughter operates on a frequency slightly outside the standard range, sit at the kitchen table and read the letter themselves while Hermione begins cross-referencing. "A school," Daniel says. "Apparently," Jean says. They look at their daughter, who is already constructing a reading list from memory. "Well," Daniel says. "Yes." Jean agrees. Diagon Alley does not overwhelm Hermione. She walks through it with her notebook open and her head turning at precise intervals. Cataloging at Ollivanders, the wand chooses her, Vinewood, Dragon Heartstring, 10 3/4 inches. And when the warmth runs up her arm, she writes wand resonance consistent with sympathetic frequency model in her notebook before Ollivander can finish his sentence. He stops mid-sentence, looks at her over his measuring tape. "You've been researching," he says. "Since November," Hermione confirms. Ollivander looks at her wand. Looks at her. Says nothing else, which she will come to understand is his version of a very high compliment. The Great Hall, when she enters it for the first time, produces in her not paralysis, but acceleration. She catalogues the enchanted ceiling, the floating candles, the 4 house tables, the staff table, and the sorting hat in approximately 4 minutes. When the hat is placed on her head, there is a voice. "Well," it says, "you've done some reading." "Quite a bit," Hermione says without moving her lips, which she intuits is the appropriate method. "Ravenclaw would suit you. Tremendous mind. They'd appreciate the annotations." "Which house produces the most comprehensive magical practitioners?" Hermione asks. Not what she wants, what the data suggests she should want. The hat is quiet for a moment. Interesting question. Most students ask where they'll be happy. "I'll be happy where I'm learning," Hermione says. "I need to know where I'll be challenged." "Gryffindor," the hat announces, to the hall. Hermione takes the hat off, hands it back to Professor McGonagall, and walks to the Gryffindor table with her chin level and her notebook already half extracted from her robe pocket. She sits. She makes a note, Gryffindor, hat-sided courage over comfort. Hypothesis, challenge-oriented placement, consistent with risk tolerance profile. The girl across from her, a round-faced prefect who has been watching this process with wide eyes, says, "Do you always take notes at meals?" "Not at meals specifically," Hermione says. "At significant events." The sorting qualifies. By the 5th week of term, the pattern is established. Front row. First hand. Every assignment returned with supplementary annotations that Flitwick, who delivers corrections with the tone of someone simultaneously correcting and deeply impressed, has asked her to self-regulate from 4 times the word limit to 2. Transfiguration is her best subject in the architectural sense. McGonagall's framework for understanding matter rearrangement maps cleanly onto the sympathetic resonance model she developed at age 8, and the first time she draws that connection in a written assignment, McGonagall reads it twice and schedules a tutorial. What she does not yet have is the instinct, the thing the best magical practitioners seem to have that is not teachable from a textbook. Magic is something alive that responds to intention before incantation. Charms she can execute with wand movements rehearsed from a diagram, which she has. But execution from diagram is a different thing entirely from execution from intention. And she knows the difference because she can feel where the understanding stops. She writes in her notebook at the end of October, underlining it twice, missing variable, magical instinct. Source unclear. Investigate. She does not yet know that the person who will teach her this is currently in Little Hangleton, reading a 300-year-old text on curse architecture in the original Latin. She does not yet know his name. Riddle House. July 1991. The Hogwarts letter arrives on a Tuesday. The owl deposits the envelope and departs in under 4 seconds. Harry watches it go from the chair by the window where he has been reading since before dawn. He finishes his page. Then he picks up the envelope. He already knows what it is. He has known it was coming for years, has tracked its approach the way a navigator tracks a coastline, by inference, by the shape of what surrounds it. Bellatrix told him about Hogwarts at age 5, not as a destination but as a variable. You will go, she said, because that is where the information is. Because the library has texts you cannot access elsewhere. Because Dumbledore runs it, and Dumbledore is the most important person to understand, and you cannot understand a man without entering his house. A pause. Also because you will need allies, and allies must be selected in person. Dumbledore will know I exist the moment I'm sorted. Harry says. Bellatrix. From the doorway. Yes. He'll spend the first 3 months trying to determine whether I'm a threat or an opportunity. Let him. He will not reach a conclusion before you've rendered the question irrelevant. Harry looks at the Hogwarts crest. Draco Dormiens nunquam titulandus. He has always thought it was misattributed. It should read never assume a sleeping dragon is asleep. He folds the letter, sets it in his trunk, which is already packed. I know, he says. Hogwarts Express, September 1st, 1991. Platform 9 3/4 is controlled chaos. Harry moves through it like water, finding the path of least resistance, which is not the same as the path of least observation. He catalogues in sequence. Threat assessment first. 2 Aurors in civilian clothes near the barrier, identifiable by the wand line under their left lapels. A Hogwarts professor scanning the platform for a child traveling alone, working from a description that will not quite match him, because expectation is always a simplification. He boards from the opposite end. He finds a compartment, sets his trunk in the rack, sits with his back to the wall and his sightline to the door, and opens a book on advanced magical theory that is not on any Hogwarts syllabus. She doesn't knock. She opens the door with the energy of someone who has checked 4 other compartments and determined that a single occupant reading something non-standard is more likely to produce acceptable conversation than 6 people discussing Quidditch. She is carrying 2 books already open, a notebook under her arm, wand visible at her hip even though first years are not technically supposed to have their wands out on the platform. She clocks the book in his hands in 1 second. That's not on the reading list, she says. No, Harry says, it's 3rd year theory. I know. She assesses him. He can track the process, the small movements of her eyes indicating indexing. She is fast. He notes this. May I sit? She asks. He considers the question genuinely, which he suspects she can tell. Yes, he says. She sits. Does not immediately speak, which elevates her significantly. She has questions. He can see them organizing behind her eyes. But she has the discipline to sequence them rather than discharge them at once. Hermione Granger, she says finally. Harry, no surname. She notices and files it. He notices her filing it. She shows him a notebook page dense with annotations, 3 incantations in the first-year charm syllabus, where standard pronunciation produces a degraded effect compared to what the root construction suggests. Flitwick's simplified version, uncorrected in 30 years. You're right, Harry says. Without qualification. She blinks. Not at the confirmation, at the absence of the hedge. Most people, when agreeing with an unusual claim, add one. She notes its absence. Which source did you find it in? She asks. Flitwick's methodology paper from 1973. He published the simplified version and never corrected it publicly. The original is in the restricted theoretical archive, Black Family copy. A pause. You have access to Black Family texts. Yes. She writes something in her notebook, then turns it 45 degrees toward him. Black Family. Restricted access. Non-standard curriculum. Not a standard first year. Accurate, Harry says. Why Hogwarts then? She asks. Not challengingly, genuinely, she wants the actual answer. Because the library has a restricted section, Harry says, and because I need to understand how this world is organized before I decide what to do with it. She looks at him for 3 full seconds. Then she writes something else, and does not show him this one. He respects this. Outside, England moves past the window. She asks him about the theoretical paper on Charm's methodology, and what he makes of the degradation at the pronunciation level, whether it is cumulative across multiple castings, or whether each casting produces the same reduced effect in isolation. He tells her the degradation is cumulative. That repeated incorrect pronunciation creates a resonance pattern in the caster's magical pathways that gradually encodes the suboptimal form, which is why students who learn the simplified version find the correction difficult in later years. It is not a muscle memory problem. It is a magical architecture problem. She stares at him. You're describing magical pathway encoding, she says. That's advanced theory. 5th year, minimum, yes, Harry says. Where did you read it? I worked it out, Harry says. From the mechanism. If you understand why the pronunciation matters, you can reason toward what happens when the pronunciation is wrong. The how follows from the why. Hermione looks at him for a moment with an expression he cannot yet read, because he does not yet have enough data on Hermione Granger to catalog all her expressions. He will accumulate that data over the next 7 years. But on this train, on this afternoon, he is working from a small sample, and the expression is outside it. Later, much later, in a different context entirely, she will tell him what that expression was. It was the expression she uses when she finds the missing variable. She corrects one of his sub-conclusions near the Scottish border, and is right to do so. He tells her, she's right. She moves to the next question. By the time the train reaches Scotland, they have worked through her 47 open questions and generated, between them, a further 19. Hogwarts, Great Hall. September 1st, 1991. The Great Hall receives them in candlelight and thunder. Dumbledore finds Harry, before Harry has fully cleared the doorway. Not surprise. Recognition. The careful, controlled recognition of someone who has been expecting a thing and is now recalibrating because it is not precisely what they expected. Harry holds his gaze for 4 seconds, then moves it deliberately to the Sorting Hat, because allowing Dumbledore to read his reaction to being recognized is a concession he is not prepared to make in the first 30 seconds. Potter, Harry, the room doesn't go silent so much as it stops, the ambient noise draining out like water from a tilted glass. He walks to the stool. Sits, the hat descends. Darkness, then a voice, old and dry, without any of the performance it used with the students before him. I know what you are. Then you know where I belong. Harry thinks back. Do I? The hat moves through his mind, not intrusively, but the way candlelight moves through a room, illuminating surfaces. There is a great deal of Slytherin here. Ambition, patience, the long view. And something else. A pause. Something that wasn't in this mind when this scar was made. Harry waits. I cannot sort you, the hat says, and it sounds careful, the way a cartographer sounds when they reach the edge of the mapped territory. What sits in this chair is not one student. No, Harry agrees. It isn't. The hat lifts from his head on its own. It rises 6 inches and stops, hovering, which has not happened in 400 years of sortings. The Great Hall watches in the specific silence of 200 people who have stopped breathing. Harry reaches up, takes the hat from the air, sets it back on the stool. He stands, turns, then he looks at the Slytherin table, its green hangings, its silver trim. The specific quality of cool calculation running through its occupants like a current, and walks to it. He sits down. The hat says nothing. At the staff table, Dumbledore picks up his goblet and takes a slow drink, and his expression, for just a moment before he reassembles it into benevolence, is that of a man who has watched his most carefully held assumption walk out from under him and sit down at the wrong table, wearing the right face. Harry helps himself to the potatoes. Slytherin Common Room, September 1st, 1991. Draco Malfoy arrives at 22 minutes. He crosses the room with the confidence of inherited certainty and stops in front of Harry's chair. "You're Harry Potter," he says. Not a question, an opening move. "I know something about you." "Yes," Harry says, and provides nothing more. "You've been dead," Draco says, recalibrating to directness. "For 10 years, everyone thought." "I know what everyone thought," Harry says. "Where were you?" Harry considers the question. Not the answer, the question itself, the particular flavor of entitlement that makes someone believe their curiosity entitles them to information. "That," he says, "is not a conversation for the first night." "My father, your father," Harry says, "is Lucius Malfoy. He joined the Dark Lord's service in 1973, held the rank of Inner Circle by 1979, and claimed Imperius at the trials in 1982, which was a lie, but a useful one, and Dumbledore accepted it because the alternative was dismantling half the social architecture of the wizarding world at once, which he calculated was worse than the compromise." A pause. "He visited Riddle House in 1989. I was 8. He brought wine and information about ministry personnel rotations. He was there for 4 hours." Another pause. "I remember everything about everyone who came through that house. Tell your father I said hello. 6 students within earshot have all stopped pretending to do other things." Draco Malfoy stands in front of a first year, who has just recited his father's biography with the detached precision of a clerk reading a file, who has placed himself inside the history of the Death Eater network as something other than a victim or a bystander, and who is looking at him now with green eyes that are patient and completely without aggression, and somehow, for that reason, more disquieting than aggression would have been. He leaves. Not quickly. Malfoys do not do things quickly when people are watching. Harry returns to his book. Potions Classroom, September 3rd, 1991. Snape teaches potions the way Bellatrix teaches curses, from the mechanism, not the outcome. Harry recognizes the methodology within the first 4 minutes of the first lesson, and recalibrates his assessment of Snape upward, which it needed. Snape enters, and his opening address is structurally a masterpiece. He reads the first years in a single sweep, identifies those who will coast, those who will struggle, and the student who arrived first, read the ingredient list on the board, and is working through the potion's mechanism in his head. "Potter," Harry looks up. In the 2-second eye contact, recognition, surprise controlled instantly, recalibration, and then something that is not quite suspicion and not quite curiosity, but occupies the space between them. "What would I get?" Snape says, voice carrying the quality of someone performing for the class as much as asking. "If I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "The draught of living death," Harry says. Though the more instructive question is why the powdered root rather than the extract, the root retains the volatile compound that gives the draught its irreversibility. The extract is more stable but produces a shallower effect. If you want a true living death rather than extended stasis, you need the root. Silence. The performance quality has left Snape's expression. What remains is the actual Snape, the one who was the most technically proficient student Hogwarts had seen in a generation and who recognizes, in the way that technically proficient people always recognize each other, that he is not speaking to a child who has done some reading. 5 points to Slytherin, Snape says, and moves on. After class, the students file out. Hermione Granger, leaving with her Gryffindor classmates, catches Harry's eye through the doorway. She tilts her head 3 degrees, report later, and keeps walking. He blinks once in acknowledgement. "When the room is empty, you were not raised by muggles," Snape says. "No, you were trained in dark arts theory before your Hogwarts letter arrived." "Among other things. By whom?" Harry considers the calculation, intelligence asset with uncertain allegiances and confirmed access to Dumbledore. The information he provides must be true enough to build trust and incomplete enough to maintain leverage. By people who understood what I was going to be required to do, Harry says, which is more than can be said for the alternative arrangement. He moves to leave. At the door, without turning, the boomslang skin in the third cabinet is past its useful date. The color's wrong. Whoever your supplier is has been storing it incorrectly. He hears, as he leaves, the soft sound of the cabinet opening. A pause. The cabinet closing. Dumbledore's office, September 11th, 1991. Dumbledore requests an appointment Thursday. Harry sends back. Thursday at 7 is acceptable. I'll come to you. McGonagall reads the response, looks at Harry, reads it again. I'll convey that, she says. The gargoyle moves before Harry gives the password, pre-authorized arrival, treating this as a meeting between equals. Or wanting him to think so. He climbs the stairs. The office is exactly as described in the texts he's read. Instruments on every surface. Fawkes on his perch. Dumbledore behind the desk. The assembled warmth of his expression in its standard configuration. Harry, Dumbledore says. Please, sit down. Harry sits, says nothing. The first person to speak in a negotiation shows their priorities, and Harry has already learned everything he needs from the office. Dumbledore looks at him for a long moment. Then, with the expression of a chess player who has just watched their opponent decline the opening gambit and is revising their entire approach, "You are not what I expected." "No," Harry says. "I'm not." He folds his hands. Waits, outside. The castle settles, and the portraits pretend to sleep, and the fire is the only sound in the room. Dumbledore expected a damaged child. A boy shaped by absence who could be guided toward purpose by a careful hand. He received something else entirely. Harry watches him arrive at this conclusion in real time, and says nothing, and lets the silence do the work that words would only diminish. The most powerful man in the wizarding world recalculates. Harry gives him the time. He has learned patience from the best. Hogwarts Library, October 1991. The stone announces itself not in thunder, but in a footnote. Page 412 of A History of Magical Breakthroughs, a book so thoroughly unread the binding creaks when he opens it. The footnote's footnote mentions that Flamel's primary research in the latter half of his life concerned the stable anchoring of soul to matter beyond natural dissolution. Harry reads it twice, sets the book down, picks it back up. The soul fragment in his forehead has been quiet for weeks, and it shifts now, not into activity, but into something he can only describe as attention. The way a compass shifts when it approaches north. Not movement. Orientation. He goes to find Hermione. She is in their usual spot, the third alcove from the left, 3 books open simultaneously. He sets the open page in front of her. She reads it. Flamel the stone is here, Harry says. In the school. You can't know that from a footnote. No, I know it from this. He touches the scar briefly, and the footnote confirms the category. She integrates this with the structural revision her most productive thinking requires. Dumbledore moved it here for protection. The Gringotts break in July, the empty vault. That was the same object. She picks up her pen, making the list that always accompanies her thinking. Whatever the current protections are. They were designed to stop a direct assault, not a conversation. Yes, she looks at him with the specific clarity that appears when she has finished the calculation and is simply reading the result. You're going to talk to Dumbledore about it. I'm going to talk to Dumbledore, Harry says, and leave with the stone. The folder he brings to Dumbledore's office 3 days later is 4 pages, a timeline of Flamel's research trajectory, the Gringotts vault records cross-referenced with the July break-in, the transfer inferred from the gap in the public record and confirmed by the third-floor corridor prohibition, plus a 5th page, a single request. Access to the restricted section. Full access, standing authorization, no title restrictions. Access to the Flamel archive, the pre-ministry alchemical collection, and the Black family donated texts currently in the headmaster's private library. The stone itself, for 48 hours, with Flamel's written consent. Dumbledore reads the 5th page. The stone, he says. For 48 hours. I need to understand what it does to a soul anchor, Harry says. Specifically to a Horcrux. Specifically to the Horcrux that has been living in my scar for 10 years. He keeps his voice level and his hands still. I need to know whether there is a version of my situation that does not end with someone having to kill me to resolve it. The silence that follows is the longest Dumbledore has produced in Harry's presence. It is also the most honest. You know, Dumbledore says slowly, what you carry. I've known for 2 years. It became clear around the time I stopped assuming the voice in my head was my own. Dumbledore closes his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opens them, something has shifted, beneath the performed warmth. Visible now the way a painting's frame becomes visible when you look at the wall rather than the canvas, is something that might be grief and might be guilt, and is definitely not something he intended Harry to see. Harry sees it, files it, does not use it, not tonight. I will move the stone by the end of this week, Dumbledore says. And the request? I'll consider it. I would like an answer before the end of term, Harry says. The Horcrux question is not going to resolve itself. 3 days later, a small package arrives at his dormitory. A note in an old man's handwriting, 48 hours. I have questions of my own when you're done. The stone is warm and red as a coal. Harry sets it on his desk and calls for Hermione. They have work to do. 48 hours. What they do with them is methodical, structured, and entirely unlike anything Nicholas Flamel has likely imagined when he wrote I Have Questions of My Own. Hermione builds the observation framework, her notebook open, columns for each test category, the same rigorous architecture she applies to everything. Harry provides the variable that makes the tests possible. Himself. Specifically, the soul fragment, which responds to the stone's proximity in ways that can be measured if you know what you are measuring. The first finding, reached within 6 hours, the stone does not interact with the fragment the way a Horcrux would theoretically respond to its own preservation. It is not the stone doing what a Horcrux does. The stone is doing something different, something more like clarification, the way a lens clarifies light without changing it. The fragment becomes, in the stone's proximity, more legible, more distinct from Harry's own magical core. The second finding, reached within 18 hours, is harder to articulate, and Hermione tries 4 different formulations before settling on one Harry agrees is accurate. The boundary between the fragment and Harry's own soul is not fixed. It has been eroding, slowly, in one direction. The fragment is not merely residing, it is integrating. And if integration proceeds to completion, there will not be 2 distinct magical entities occupying the same body. There will be one. Composite. Irreversible. How long? Harry asks. Hermione looks at her calculations. Unknown. The rate is too variable, and we don't have a baseline from before you were old enough to assess it. It could be decades. It could be less. She sets down her pen. But it won't reverse on its own. So I need to reverse it deliberately. Or manage it, Hermione says. Make it something you're doing rather than something that's happening to you. She looks at him. Those are very different outcomes. Harry looks at the stone sitting on the corner of his desk, warm and patient and old. He picks it up. Sets it down. I'll write to Flamel, he says. Tonight, it is the beginning of a correspondence that will last 4 years, conducted in careful, technical language across international owl post, that will eventually produce in Harry's 6th year, during 6 months of quiet theoretical work, and one careful practical application, a modification of his own magical architecture that no one has ever attempted, and Flamel describes, in his final letter on the subject, as the most interesting thing he has read in 2 centuries. He has questions, Flamel says in that letter. Harry answers them. Hermione documents everything. Hogwarts, Year 2, September 1992. Harry finds the chamber in September of his 2nd year, 3 weeks into term, 6 weeks before the first petrification, long enough to form a complete picture, before the school forms an incomplete one. He finds it by following the current of Parseltongue that runs through Hogwarts like a second plumbing system, the castle's oldest architecture still speaking the language of its founder to anyone with the frequency to receive it. The entrance is in the second-floor girls' bathroom. The sink, the snake on the tap. He opens it alone, descends, stands in the chamber proper for 40 minutes without approaching the basilisk's lair, simply reading the space, the scale of it, the age, the intention built into every stone. Then he climbs back out and goes to Transfiguration. On the third visit, he speaks into the dark and waits. The basilisk is 60 feet long and older than the school's current headmaster by 3 centuries. The silence stretches, the specific consideration of a creature deciding whether the thing addressing it is worth addressing back. Then, a voice like stone grinding on stone, parcel tongue coming from everywhere at once, because the chamber's acoustics are designed for it. Another speaker. After so long. Yes, Harry says. I'm not here to command you. All speakers command. I'm here to understand what you are and what this place is. After that, we'll see. Another silence. Then, that is a different opening than I have received before. The conversations over the following weeks are careful and incremental. The basilisk is ancient and not inclined toward rapid trust, which Harry respects entirely. It has followed Salazar Slytherin's instruction for 1,000 years, modified by no one because no one capable of modifying it has arrived until now. Meanwhile, the school develops its own theory. The first petrification happens on a Tuesday. Mrs. Norris, found at the entrance to the Great Hall, rigid and gray-eyed, suspended in the stillness that is not death, but close enough to require a healer to confirm the distinction. Filch finds her. His reaction is operatic and entirely genuine. The second is Colin Creevey. The third, Justin Finch Fletchley, and nearly headless Nick, on the same evening. By the third petrification, the school has settled on. The heir of Slytherin, the chamber opened. A monster within. Harry watches the theory develop and propagate with the detached interest of someone reading a map of territory they have already walked. 70% correct. Enough accuracy to be dangerous. Enough inaccuracy to mislead. He also watches Ginny Weasley. He has been watching her since September, for the same reason he watches anything. Something in the pattern of her behavior registers as a variable he has not yet accounted for. She arrived at Hogwarts with the specific anxiety of someone carrying a weight they haven't named yet. By October the weight is visible. The slight inward curl of her posture, the hollow quality around her eyes. The way she holds her bag against her chest as though the bag itself is keeping her upright. In November, Harry identifies the source. He is passing her in the corridor when the cold reaches him. Not the ambient cold of the dungeons, but the specific cold he felt once before, in a room in Little Hangleton at age 6, when Bellatrix showed him what a dark object felt like at close range. Directional, intentional, the cold of something designed to consume. He stops. The cold is coming from her bag. He follows her at a distance for 4 days. Maps the intensity, stronger in the evenings, weaker in the mornings, indicating nocturnal activity he cannot directly observe. By the 4th day, he has enough. On the 6th visit to the chamber, Harry raises what he came to know. When he goes to Hermione afterward, he brings notes. A diary, he says. Not just an enchanted object, a vessel. The diary is the surface. What's inside it is a piece of a soul. The same construction as mine, but intentional. Designed, whoever made it put a memory inside it. A fragment of themselves at a specific age. The fragment has been feeding on Ginny Weasley and building itself up. And when it has enough strength, it will control her completely and use her to open the chamber. But the chamber is already open, Hermione says. The diary doesn't know that. It's 50-year-old intelligence operating on 50-year-old information. It knows there's a basilisk. It doesn't know the current heir has already introduced himself. He sets down the notes. Riddle. Tom Riddle. Age 16. She absorbs this. She is the only person at Hogwarts, possibly the only person outside Riddle House, who knows enough of Harry's full situation to understand what it means that a piece of Tom Riddle's soul is currently working its way through a first-year girl 30 feet below where they are sitting. We need to get the diary away from her, Hermione says. Without alerting her, without alerting the diary, and without triggering whatever failsafe it's carrying in case of interference. Yes, he folds his hands. I'm going to go back to the chamber first. I'm going to ask the basilisk to choose something different than the instruction it's been following for 1,000 years. On the 6th visit, he stands in the entrance to the basilisk's lair and waits. The sound of something massive moving through stone, air displaced by 60 feet of ancient creature. It stops 8 feet away. He can hear its breathing. You have come more than before, it says. I need to talk to you about Riddle, Harry says. The young one. The one in the object. A pause. I have known for months that the object was moving through the school. I knew it was building toward an opening command. I did not tell you. Why? Because you did not ask. And because I was curious what you would do when you found it yourself. A sound too large and slow for a sigh, but occupying the same space. I would have obeyed the command when it came. I am very old, and Riddle's instruction is the only instruction I have ever been given. In the absence of a countermanding instruction from a recognized authority, I would have obeyed. I did not want to. I'm a recognized authority? You speak, the basilisk says. You have entered this chamber 6 times and commanded nothing, and taken nothing, and asked questions and listened to the answers. In 1,000 years, you are the first to do that. The slow movement of something massive settling. Yes, you are recognized. Harry takes a breath. Then here is a countermanding instruction, he says. No petrifications. No attacks. The diary will send a girl down here and she will speak the command. And you will not obey it. Not because I'm ordering you to refuse, because I'm asking you to choose. And I'm telling you that you have the right to choose, and that choosing is something you should have been offered 1,000 years ago. The longest silence yet. Then the basilisk says, in the oldest Parseltongue Harry has ever heard it use, the formal register, the one it uses when it is speaking something that matters. And what do I choose instead? Whatever you want, Harry says. But I have a suggestion. 4 days later, Hermione sits beside Ginny Weasley at breakfast and engages her in a conversation about charms theory that is genuinely interesting enough to require Ginny's full attention. Harry passes behind the bench and lifts the diary with the sleight of hand Bellatrix spent 6 months teaching him at age 9. The best curse, she said, is the one you never have to cast. He replaces it with a blank journal. Identical cover. The diary goes into a warded box in his trunk. The Aurors arrive on a Thursday. 6 of them. Ministry standard. The particular confidence of people accustomed to their presence resolving situations. McGonagall conveys her opinion of their timing through the temperature of her cooperation. Technically complete, emotionally sub-zero. Harry arrives 4 minutes after they do. Sits. Sets a folder on the table. I've prepared a report, he says. It covers the Chamber of Secrets, the basilisk, the mechanism of the petrifications, the diary Horcrux introduced into the school's population via a student's school supplies, and my resolution of each element. It also includes the name of the individual who introduced the diary and the documentation supporting that identification. 6 Aurors look at the folder. The petrified students will recover. Madame Pomfrey has the Mandrake Restorative ready. I've spoken with the basilisk and reached an arrangement that removes it from the threat category. The diary is available for evidence. A pause. I've also written to Flamel about the Horcrux question. He finds it interesting. The lead Auror reads the first page. Reads it again. You were down there, he says. Several times, Harry says. And the basilisk is fine, Harry says. Better than fine. It hasn't had a real conversation in 3 centuries. He stands. The report has everything you need. If you have questions beyond what's there, I'm available Tuesday afternoons. Thank you for coming. He leaves. Behind him, 6 Ministry Aurors sit in a classroom in Hogwarts and read a 12-year-old's incident report. Outside the windows, the lake is deep and dark, and somewhere far below, in a chamber sealed for 1,000 years, something ancient and enormous coils in the dark and breathes, and for the first time in 3 centuries, it is not waiting for a command. It has chosen to rest. Hogwarts, 5th year, October 1995. Hermione discovers the educational decrees not when they arrive, but through the mechanism that will produce them, a clause in Ministry archived legislation. Inserted in 1903 and never scrutinized because never used. The clause grants the minister emergency authority over Hogwarts staffing and curriculum in the event of an educational crisis. With educational crisis defined so broadly, it encompasses almost any circumstance the minister chooses to designate. She closes the archive. Opens her notebook. Writes, "They are going to use this." Identify the trigger. Build the counter before it arrives. The trigger arrives as Dolores Umbridge, September, pink cardigan. The voice of someone who has decided softness of tone excuses everything that follows it. Harry identifies her category within 4 minutes, the institutional predator. Not the kind that operates through obvious force, the kind that builds authority through process, through paperwork, through procedure, through the slow accretion of power that is impossible to challenge, because each individual step is technically defensible. Bellatrix taught him about this category. They don't have vulnerabilities you can reach with a wand, she said. They have records. The way you fight them is with better records. Harry told Hermione this in second year. Hermione said, without looking up, I know. I've been building them since first year. Decree 23 appears in October, the Ministry's right to appoint a High Inquisitor. The appointment preceded the decree, meaning the decree was written around the appointment rather than authorized by it. Harry notes this. First procedural flaw. By December, Umbridge holds authority to attend any class without notification, strip house points without consultation, and issue detentions without oversight. Harry attends every class she observes with the same expression he used in the Auror interview. Present, cooperative, completely illegible. Watching her from 3 rows back, reading upside down. He notes what she writes on her clipboard. Potter, non-reactive. Monitor, he is satisfied she has made this assessment. Hermione is, by institutional necessity, more visible. She answers questions. She corrects errors. Not Umbridge's directly. She is too precise for direct confrontation at this stage, but corrections that establish on record what the actual standard is versus what Umbridge is teaching. By December, Umbridge has assigned her detention twice for excessive answering, which is not a real offense, and which Hermione documents with the care of someone handling evidence. Because it is not a real offense, the documentation framework Hermione built in October has, by December, generated 14 pages across 11 columns. Harry reviews it one evening in the third alcove, and adds a 13th column. Minister's authorization chain, he writes. Document which decrees he signed personally versus delegated. Hermione looks at the addition. Why? Because if Fudge is signing these personally, Harry says, then the decrees fall with him when he falls. But if he's delegating through Umbridge, the mechanism survives his removal and we have to dismantle it separately. She looks at the 13th column for 3 seconds. Then she copies it into her other 2 notebooks. The blood quill appears in January. Harry is in Hermione's dormitory, McGonagall's handling of this irregularity being to simply not acknowledge it, which is its own form of institutional support, when she shows him her hand. The words are carved in her own handwriting. I must not tell lies. He looks at it for 3 seconds. His face does not change. How many sessions? 4. The scarring will be permanent. She opens a folder. Of course she has a folder. She has had one since October. Medical documentation from Madame Pomfrey, who has confirmed in writing that the instrument constitutes a Category 3 dark object under the 1979 Dangerous Artifacts classification. Photographs, every session documented, date, duration, the specific pretext she used. Harry looks at the folder. Then, at her hand. This is the standing. Yes, Hermione says. This is the standing. Who do we file with? Not the Ministry. Fudge controls the DMLA and he'll bury it. We go to the Wizengamot Oversight Committee directly. It has independent jurisdiction for complaints against Ministry officials and is chaired by Madame Bones, who is either incorruptible or does an excellent impression of it. We file jointly, Harry says. My name carries different weight in Wizengamot chambers. She looks at him. The look she uses when she wants to disagree with something and has identified the disagreement as tactical rather than principled. Agreed. The filing reaches Madame Bones on a Thursday. It is 47 pages, 11 educational decrees, 6 procedurally invalid detentions, 4 documented applications of a classified dark object on a minor, and a 13-column authorization chain that demonstrates with surgical specificity exactly which decisions Cornelius Fudge made personally, and which he allowed Umbridge to make in his name. Bones schedules a Wizengamot oversight hearing the following Monday. Hermione stands before the oversight committee, 12 members, Bones at the center, and presents the documentation in the order she designed the framework to produce, chronological, cross-referenced, with the authorization chain rendered as a visual diagram that makes Fudge's decision-making visible in a way 47 pages of text alone cannot. She speaks for 11 minutes. "Minister," Bones says, "the High Inquisitor used a Category 3 dark object on a student on 4 documented occasions. The authorization chain document shows your signature on Decree 25, which granted her unilateral authority over student discipline. Did you read Decree 25 before signing it?" A pause that answers the question. The committee finds that 11 of the 17 educational decrees are procedurally invalid, as they fail to meet the crisis threshold requirement of the 1903 clause. Those 11 decrees are struck, effective immediately. Bones looks at Fudge. The committee further recommends a full audit of the minister's office, with specific attention to the delegation practices documented in Section 4. Hermione, who is 15 years old and standing in a Wizengamot chamber with her folder closed because she no longer needs it, says, "Madam Bones, the documentation in Section 7 establishes that 2 of the remaining 6 decrees are also procedurally questionable, pending verification of a secondary authorization we have requested from the Ministry Archives. We expect that documentation within 10 days. Bones looks at her, the look of someone encountering precision they recognize and respect. Noted. 10 days. Outside the chamber, Harry is on a bench with his hands folded and his eyes on the middle distance. Hermione sits beside him. 11 decrees. The other 6? 2 more, within 10 days. The remaining 4 are defensible. We leave them. Fudge? He won't survive the audit. The question is whether he resigns before it concludes, or after. Before, Harry says. He's the type who manages his exit. They walk toward the flue. The ministry atrium moves around them, officials crossing the seal, the fountain in the center, the hum of an institution that does not yet know how comprehensively it has just been rearranged. "You were 11 minutes, Harry says. "I could have done it in 9, Hermione says, but the diagram needed time to read properly. The diagram was the right call. "I know that too," she says, and steps into the fire, and is gone. Hogwarts, 4th year, October 1994. The Goblet of Fire selects Harry Potter on a Thursday evening. The name comes out 4th, after 3 champions have been chosen and the goblet has gone dark, and the 4th slip of parchment drifts to Dumbledore's hand. Harry finishes the sentence he is reading before he stands. "I didn't enter," he says to Dumbledore, quietly, when he reaches the front. "I know," Dumbledore says. "The contract still binds." "Yes." Harry looks at the goblet, cold now, its purpose discharged. "Then I'll need to understand the contract's exact terms before the first task." The binding is only enforceable within the scope of what was originally agreed, and someone entered my name without my knowledge, which creates a question about the scope of my obligation. That is a very precise legal observation. "I've had good tutoring," Harry says, and returns to the Slytherin table. Hermione's contract review takes 4 days. The conclusion: he must compete. The binding is real. But the scope is limited to the 3 tasks as defined by the original tournament charter. Nothing beyond that. And the person who entered your name, she says, is using the tournament's binding to deliver you somewhere specific. The portkey at the end of the 3rd task. Wherever it goes, that's where they need you. Graveyard, Harry says. She looks at him. "You know?" "Wormtail. A ritual requiring my blood. A resurrection." He sets down his quill. "It's inelegant. The blood requirement is the only part that actually needs me present. Everything else could be managed differently. They need the blood of the enemy who defeated him. The ritual requires it specifically." "I know." A pause. I also know that the ritual works, that it will produce a body, that the body will be functional, and the magic will be real. She looks at him carefully. You're going to let it happen. I'm going to be there when it happens, Harry says. Those are different things. He spends the months between October and June doing 3 things simultaneously: competing in the tournament with the precise minimum of effort required to advance without revealing useful intelligence about his capabilities. The Hungarian horntail moved aside after 4 minutes of parcel tongue, which is so far outside the expected solution set that the judges' scoring rubric has no category for it, and they default to high marks out of institutional confusion. The second task he completes in 40 minutes, resurfaces and waits. Cedric Diggory surfacing 11 minutes later to find Harry sitting on the bank reading. He accepts the warming charm without comment. He is a decent person, and Harry has a limited but specific appreciation for decent people. Preparing for the graveyard, in the chamber during evenings when the castle assumes he is studying, working through the resurrection ritual's mechanics, mapping every step and every point at which it can be observed and understood and responded to, rather than merely survived. And writing letters. To Bellatrix, routed through 3 intermediaries. In the Black family cipher uncorrupted for 400 years. Her letters back are short. The last one, received in May, contains 6 words. Come home after. Tell me everything. He folds it into the grimoire, on page 247, and does not look at it again. Little Hangleton Graveyard, June 1995. The maze is navigable. Harry moves through it with the efficiency of someone who has spent 6 months thinking about what the maze is before encountering it. At the final junction, he finds Cedric Diggory trapped under a full body bind, releases him, and they reach the cup together. Harry puts his hand on it at the same moment Cedric reaches, deliberate. A shared grip changing the portkey's destination parameters under the original charter, a technicality Hermione found in week 2, and which Harry has been patient enough to execute at precisely the right moment. The world inverts. Little Hangleton Graveyard arrives in the specific way arrival by portkey always arrives. Instant, complete. No transitional state. Harry is standing before the ground finishes deciding to be ground. He releases the cup immediately. Cedric lands beside him. What? Stay close. Don't touch your wand. Don't make a threat gesture. Where are we? Little Hangleton. Wormtail will be here in approximately 30 seconds. He has a bundle. Don't look at the bundle. It is 28 seconds. Wormtail stops when he sees 2 arrivals instead of 1. His watery eyes move between them. 2, he says. Diggory touched the cup with me. The portkey took us both. Harry's voice contains exactly as much information as the sentence requires. He's not part of what's happening tonight. The ritual needs my blood. It doesn't need Diggory. Let him stand aside. I have instructions. Your instructions were written for 1 arrival. I'm offering you a clean version of the same outcome. The ritual proceeds. You complete your task. Nobody makes an error they can't correct. Wormtail, unable to find a flaw in this logic and in the absence of one defaulting to compliance, nods. Harry glances at Cedric, who has understood approximately 60% of what is happening and has correctly identified that the remaining 40 will become clear shortly. A small nod. The ritual begins. Bone of the father. The earth opens. Flesh of the servant. Wormtail's face does not change. He has prepared himself, or been prepared by something beyond fear. Blood of the enemy. Harry extends his arm before the incantation is finished, not in submission but in the efficiency of someone who has made every decision about this moment, and is now simply executing. The cut is sharp and brief. The blood falls into the cauldron and the fire turns white. The cauldron cracks open, and Voldemort steps out. He is tall. Whole. The magic, settling into the ritual body like water finding its level. The red eyes open and find Harry with the precision of something oriented toward him for 14 years. A silence that is entirely still. Harry, Voldemort says. Not Potter. Harry, my lord, Harry says. He inclines his head, not deeply, not a bow. The specific angle Bellatrix spent 3 lessons calibrating. The angle that communicates hierarchy while retaining dignity. Voldemort moves through the graveyard, testing the body, reacquainting with physical existence. Harry tracks him without turning his head. "You came prepared," Voldemort says. "Yes, you knew. Yes, you should be afraid. I've had a piece of you in my head since I was 15 months old," Harry says. "There's very little about you that frightens me. Some things interest me. Fear is a different category." The red eyes settle on him with an expression Harry has only seen in one other person's face. It is not warmth, not affection in any conventional sense. It is recognition. The specific recognition of a creator encountering their creation and finding it exceeds the original design. Voldemort says nothing for a moment. "Show me," he says, very quietly. Harry reaches into his coat. Wormtail twitches. Cedric stops breathing and produces a folder. 12 pages. Hermione's structure. His content, organized around a single central question that he has spent 5 years building toward answering. "I've been thinking," Harry says, "about what comes after. Not the war. After the war. What you actually want, underneath the conquest, underneath the immortality. What Tom Riddle wanted before he decided wanting was a vulnerability." He holds the folder out. "I think you wanted to matter. Permanently, irrevocably, to build something that survived you. To be the kind of cause that people are still arguing about in 500 years. He sets the folder on the nearest gravestone. Wars end and the winner writes the history, and in 100 years you're a cautionary tale in a textbook. But reform, structural, foundational reform of a magical society that has been stagnating for 2 centuries under the weight of its own binary thinking, that's still argued about in 500 years. That has your fingerprints on it, permanently. I've been building the framework. I need a signature that carries weight. Yours carries more than anyone else's, if it's used correctly." He steps back. The graveyard is Little Hangleton, and it is June, and it is very cold for June. And no one in it makes a sound. Voldemort picks up the folder. He opens it. He reads the first page with the quality of attention that indicates revision in progress. Carefully, without rushing, a mind encountering something that is rearranging its understanding of a situation it thought it had fully mapped. He reads the second page. The third. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th pages, without quite seeming to decide to, he lowers himself to sit on the nearest gravestone. The resurrection cauldron behind him still warm, the steam largely dissipated now, the earth beside it settling, and continues reading with the folder open across his lap. Wormtail stands to the side with his bandaged wrist pressed to his chest and does not speak, because Wormtail has spent 20 years learning to identify the moments in which interruption would not be survivable. Cedric has understood the remaining 40% and is very carefully not reacting. Harry waits. He is very good at waiting. He has been trained for it since he was 4 years old, and he has been waiting for this specific moment, in various forms, since the age of 7. He stands with his hands loose at his sides and his expression arranged in the particular neutrality that contains everything and reveals nothing, and he watches Voldemort read. When he looks up, Harry meets his eyes. The green eyes carry, unmistakably, something inherited, not the soul fragment's frequency, but the same patience. The same long view, the same willingness to wait for the correct moment rather than accepting the available one. He made this, Voldemort thinks. Whatever else is true, whatever decisions converged on this graveyard on this night, he made this. Chapter 3, Voldemort says. The Wizengamot Reform. The voting block you're proposing, you've already secured 2 of the 7 seats. 3, Harry says, as of last month. Who is the third? Bones. She doesn't know it yet. But she will. Voldemort closes the folder. The night holds. And Lord Voldemort, newly embodied, standing in his family's graveyard with a resurrection still cooling in the earth beside him, looks at the boy he made, the heir he built without knowing he was building, the plan he enacted without knowing he was planning, and does something that Wormtail, in 20 years of service, has never once seen him do. He says, continue. Riddle House, July 1995. The inner circle assembles on a Saturday. They come through the gates one by one, summoned by the dark mark burning for the first time in 13 years, not the searing, unignorable burn of the war years, but a steady, measured pulse, the difference between a scream and a knock. Those who felt it said, later, that the quality of the summons itself was different, more deliberate, as though whoever was calling had decided, this time, to give them the option of arriving with dignity. Harry returned the morning after the graveyard, portkeyed directly to the front gate. Cedric delivered first to Hogwarts by a separate portkey he had prepared in April and kept in his coat pocket for the scenario he hoped wouldn't be necessary. Cedric arrived in the entrance hall with no memory of the graveyard, a targeted obliviate. Surgical. One of the 3 applications Bellatrix ever permitted him, one of the 2 he has used. Bellatrix arrived the night before the summons, because she is always ahead of the summons. She found Harry in his old room, unchanged, the desk still angled toward the window, and stood in the doorway for a moment that was longer than her usual economy of gesture. "You're taller," she said. "You said you wanted me to come home," Harry said, "and to tell you everything." He told her everything, not in the order it happened, but in the order that made structural sense, because that is how Bellatrix receives information. The tournament. The graveyard. The ritual. The folder. Voldemort reading the first page, and then the second, and then sitting down on a gravestone with the folder open in his lap, while resurrection steam was still rising from the earth. Bellatrix listened without interrupting, which is the highest form of attention she offers anyone. "He agreed," she said finally. "Not a question." Testing the shape of the information against her own knowledge of Voldemort, decades of proximity to a mind that is not like other minds, and finding it fit. He read all 12 pages before he spoke again, Harry said. Then he asked 2 questions. The timeline for the Visingamat reform, and whether I'd spoken to you about it. "What did you tell him?" "That I tell you everything." The expression that crossed her face then is not something Harry has a precise word for. It appears, rarely, when something exceeds what she had prepared herself to expect. It has the quality of someone encountering evidence that the thing they built has become something beyond the building. She put her hand on his shoulder briefly. Then she went downstairs, and the conversation was over, which meant it was complete. The assembly takes place in the ground floor drawing room, high ceilings, no warmth in the furnishings, the kind of space that communicates authority through absence rather than presence. The Death Eaters arrange themselves without instruction, finding their positions relative to each other with the precision of people whose sense of rank has never dissolved, merely gone dormant. Harry stands to Voldemort's left. Not assigned, chosen, in October, during the planning that preceded the graveyard by 8 months. The left position is subordinate in formal magical hierarchy, but operative, the one from which decisions are practically managed. He has spent 5 years learning the distinction between symbolic authority and functional authority. Voldemort enters. The effect is immediate. 13 years is long enough for people to have revised their memories into something manageable, the power without the presence, the fear without the specific quality of being in the same room with the thing generating it. The revision unmakes itself the moment he crosses the threshold, and the room responds with the involuntary full-body acknowledgement of people, in the presence of something operating at a different scale. He speaks for 23 minutes. Harry listens for what the performance of his thinking reveals, which arguments he leads with, where he tightens the pressure. The 12-page folder has done something to him. The long game is in there now, the 500-year thinking, already integrated and metabolized and made his own. A genuinely good mind does not borrow. It absorbs. There are changes, Voldemort says when he finishes. In method, in aim, in the shape of what we are building. What I will tell you now is that the structure you are standing in is not the structure you remember. It is better. After the room clears, the senior members remain. Bellatrix at Voldemort's right, Harry at his left. You will meet with him individually, Voldemort says. Any questions about the new framework, you bring to him first. Lucius Malfoy's expression requires considerable management. He manages it. Him, he says, and the pronoun carries the weight of a man who needs clarification and has identified that needing it is a vulnerability he is attempting to dress as a formality. Lord Potter, Voldemort says. He says it the way he says his own title, as a statement of fact, rather than argument. Facts do not require support. They require only assertion and the authority to back it. The room receives this. Lucius Malfoy looks at Harry Potter, 14 years old, small-framed, green-eyed, wearing robes that are exactly what is appropriate and nothing more, and performs, in approximately 4 seconds, the complete revision of every assumption he has operated under since October 1981. Lord Potter, Lucius says. He inclines his head. The others follow. Harry receives this with the same expression he has used throughout the assembly. Then we'll begin briefings Monday. 2 hours each. Bring your intelligence on ministry personnel, your financial holdings, your contact networks. Everything you think I probably already know, bring anyway. I'll tell you if the information is redundant. The room empties. Voldemort moves to the window. Malfoy will be the friction point, he says. Yes, I'll brief him last. By the time I reach him, everyone he respects will have already been briefed. He'll arrive knowing the shape of the thing and needing only to decide whether to be part of it. That removes the performance of skepticism. Bellatrix, from the doorway, he'll commit. Both of them look at her. He has a son, she says. Draco is 15. He is going to have to make a decision about what world Draco inherits. She looks at Harry. Give him the framework and time to think about that. He'll commit. Monday briefing, Harry says. Last slot. He picks up his coat. At the door, Harry, Voldemort says. He stops. You brought a folder to a graveyard, Voldemort says. The tone is not quite anything Harry has a word for. Most people brought fear. Most people, Harry says, hadn't spent 14 years preparing for the meeting. He goes upstairs. His room is exactly as he left it. The desk angled toward the window. The bookshelves. The gate below, empty now. The last of the inner circle departed into the July evening. He opens his notebook. Page 1 of the implementation phase is already half filled. He picks up his quill. He begins. The Monday briefings proceed in the sequence Harry planned. The first 7 are straightforward. Intelligence reviewed. Network positions mapped. The new framework laid out with the precision he has been practicing since the 3rd chapter of the 12-page document. These are not difficult conversations. The Death Eaters who have survived 13 years of caution are accustomed to adapting to new information. They receive the framework, assess it against their own interests, and align where alignment is rational and where it is the only surviving option. Lucius Malfoy arrives on Monday afternoon in the last slot, which means he has spent the preceding week listening to the accounts of 6 people whose assessments he respects, all of whom have described the framework with varying degrees of discomfort and consistent acknowledgement that it is coherent. He arrives, therefore, already knowing the shape of the thing. He sits across the table from Harry in the small study at the back of Riddle House, with his hands folded, and his expression managed to a quality of interested neutrality that costs him effort. Harry has been watching him perform effort management since first year. He knows what it looks like by now. The voting blocks, Malfoy says, opening with intelligence rather than reaction. Which is the correct move. The 3 you've assigned to me to deliver. The Rosier block, the Selwyn Alliance, and the Greengrass position. Yes, Harry says. The Greengrass position will move on the blood status provision, Malfoy says. The Rosier block I can deliver inside a month. The Selwyn Alliance requires a longer conversation. There is a specific concern about Article 2, the Goblin provision, that I'll need to address through their legal representative. Harry looks at him. This is a briefing in which Lucius Malfoy is delivering tactical analysis of his own deliverables, rather than asking whether he has to deliver them. The decision has already been made, evidently, sometime in the preceding week, and what is being presented now is the implementation, rather than the commitment. Bellatrix was right. He thought about Draco. The Selwyn concern about Article 2, Harry says. What is it specifically? Inheritance. Malfoy says. The Selwyn family has 3 Gringotts accounts under the current structure that exist because of the asymmetry in Goblin contract law. If that asymmetry is resolved by the co-governance framework, there are implications for the account's terms. Tell them the accounts are grandfathered under existing terms for 30 years, Harry says, after which they renegotiate with Goblin legal representation present. That's in the Act, subsection 2 of Article 2. It's already there. Malfoy pauses, opens the document, finds subsection 2. His expression does not change in any way most people would notice. "I missed that," he says. "Most people have," Harry says. "Hermione put it in section 2 because that's where it belongs structurally, but the Wizengamot reading order means most members reach section 4 before they understand what section 2 is doing. I'll flag it in the briefing notes." Lucius Malfoy looks at him across the table, at Harry Potter, 15 years old, who has just saved him a week of negotiation and demonstrated that the protection was already there, and Lucius simply hadn't found it yet, and performs a further revision. Not of the commitment. He committed before he walked into the room. Of the scale of what he committed to. The public endorsement, Malfoy says. "When the timing is right," Harry says. "Not during the transitional period, that's too early and it reads as opportunism. After the Foundations Act passes. When the endorsement can be framed as leadership rather than realignment." Malfoy nods. "One motion. Precise. Monday briefing. Last slot," he says. "You planned it this way." "Yes," Harry says. "I needed you to arrive with your decision already made. That requires knowing that everyone else had already decided, which requires them going first." Lucius Malfoy is quiet for a moment. "You were 8 years old when I came to this house," he says. "I don't remember you." "I know," Harry says. "I was in the hallway on the first floor. You didn't look up." A pause. "I wasn't trying to be seen." Malfoy leaves 10 minutes later. Harry sits in the small study for a few minutes after, not reviewing notes, not writing, just sitting. Then he picks up his quill and begins the briefing notes for the Wizengamot rollout, and the Section 2 flag, and the Selwyn concern, and what Hermione will need to know for the next phase. The work does not stop. That is the thing about implementation. It does not stop. Ministry of Magic, September 1996. The audit findings land on Amelia Bones's desk on a Monday morning, hand-delivered by a ministry clerk who carries the folder with the quality of someone transporting something that has changed shape several times on the way from the archive and may not be finished changing. Bones reads for 40 minutes without stopping. The audit covers 14 months of Cornelius Fudge's financial relationships, appointment decisions, and policy directions. 41 pages of findings. 2 pages of summary. The summary is sufficient. 9 ministry appointments made on the basis of financial relationships rather than qualification. 4 policy decisions reversed within weeks of significant donations to Fudge's discretionary fund. 2 Emily investigations closed without conclusion at ministerial direction. And at the center of the network, appearing 7 times in the first 10 pages of the financial record, Lucius Malfoy. Bones places both hands flat on her desk and looks at the wall for a period of time. Her assistant, through the glass partition, will later describe as the longest she had ever seen Madame Bones look at anything that wasn't a document. Then she calls her assistant. "Get me Scrimgeour," she says, "and find out where Potter is." Harry is in the Hogwarts library, 3rd alcove when the owl arrives. He finishes his sentence before reading the note. "Bones," Hermione says from across the table. Not a question. The audit conclusions. She wants to meet. He closes his notebook. This is the acceleration point. Once she has the Malfoy documentation, the reform timeline compresses. We need everything ready. "Everything is ready," Hermione says. She taps the stack of notebooks to her left, 5 of them, the architecture of the reform built across 2 years of evenings in this alcove. 19 confirmed votes. The Bones block gives us 4 more. Longbottom contingent on Augusta's read of the political situation. That's 24. The remaining 2 are Abbott and Macmillan. "Send the letters today," Harry says. Before the meeting. Abbott through the blood status provision, Hermione says. Already writing. Macmillan through the education reform. His son has wandless ability he's been hiding, because there's no legitimate framework for it. The meeting with Bones is at 2 p.m. in her office. The only space in the ministry that looks like its occupant uses it for actual work. She looks at Harry across her desk with the expression of someone who reads situations rather than people. Because situations are more reliable. "You're 16, she says. "Yes, you have a political relationship with the Malfoy family." A professional relationship, Harry says, and sets a second folder on her desk. Documented and available for review. The documentation distinguishes between Malfoy's ministry facing corruption, which the audit covers, and his separate professional relationship with me, which it does not. They are not the same thing. You're separating him from the corruption network. I'm separating the documented corruption from the separate relationship. The audit's findings stand on their own. What I'm presenting is Malfoy's cooperation with the reform framework, which predates several of the audit's identified offenses, and which I'd argue constitutes partial mitigation in terms of what the Wizengamot does with his case after Fudge falls. That's a legal argument. It's a political argument dressed in legal language, which is most arguments that matter. Bones opens the final document, 104 pages, bound, indexed. She reads with total attention, taking the information in its own shape before imposing a framework on it. The Abbot and Macmillan votes, she says. Harry looks at her. You've spoken to them. My assistant made 2 calls this morning after your owl arrived. They confirmed receiving letters yesterday, Saturday delivery. She looks at him. You sent those letters before our meeting. I didn't need the meeting to know you'd call one. The silence of a person recalibrating the scope of a situation they had partially mapped. 26 votes, Bones says. 26 confirmed. Potentially 28 if the Longbottom seat moves the way I expect once the audit is public. How long have you been building this? She asks. The framework started in my 2nd year, Harry says. The documentation in 3rd. The voting architecture in 4th. The final text in 5th and 6th. He pauses. Hermione wrote most of Section 4, the blood status provisions. I'd recommend reading that section first. It's the most technically precise and it will give you the measure of the rest. Fudge resigns 8 days after the audit publication, a statement released through the Daily Prophet, framed as a choice made for the good of the ministry during necessary transition. The framing is the specific framing of a man managing his exit, exactly as Harry predicted. 8 days, Hermione says, appearing beside Harry in the entrance hall when the Prophet arrives. The window opens now, Harry says. We present at the emergency Wizengamot sitting for transitional authority confirmation. End of session, chamber fully assembled, operating under maximum autonomy protocols. He hands her the paper. Fudge? Gone. She confirms. The question is implementation speed. We present Tuesday, Harry says. Hermione opens her notebook. I'll adjust the opening of Section 2. The blood status framing needs to reference the transitional context explicitly. Do it today. I need the revised text by Sunday. She is already writing. Wizengamot Chamber, Tuesday, October 1996. The chamber is full. 51 members, all seats occupied, the transitional authority confirmation having drawn attendance that standard sessions rarely achieve. The chamber has the quality of a room that knows something is going to happen, and is waiting to find out what it is. The transitional business concludes at 3:15. Harry stands. I'd like to address the chamber, he says. Griselda Marchbanks, 87 years old, former head of the Wizarding Examinations Authority. A woman whose opinion of procedural correctness is absolute, and whose opinion of people who waste her time is not printable, looks at him over her spectacles. Lord Potter. You have the floor. He walks to the presentation position, places the document on the stand, does not open it. The Foundations Act. 5 articles. I'll summarize each. The full text has been distributed to every member's seat. He looks at the chamber. 51 people whose understanding of the wizarding world is about to be asked to do something it has never been asked to do. Article 1. Blood Status Registry Abolition. Every existing classification, pureblood, half-blood, muggle-born, removed from ministry record and stripped of legal weight. Not because the distinctions aren't real, because making them legally operative has produced, across 2 centuries, a society that mistakes inherited circumstance for individual quality. That mistake has cost us 3 wars. We cannot afford a 4th. The specific silence of a room that is listening. Article 2. Goblin Rights Formalization. Legal Personhood. Co-Governance Council. The Gringotts relationship rebuilt on a foundation that doesn't require one party to pretend the other isn't intelligent. Ironscale has already agreed in principle. He said, and I am quoting directly, "It is about time." A ripple through the chamber. Not laughter. Something adjacent to it. Article 3. Ancient Magic Curriculum. Hogwarts Course Expansion. Wandless Casting. Runecraft. Magical Heritage from the Foundation Up. We have been teaching the simplified version of our own tradition for so long that most of our graduates don't know the original exists. That changes. Article 4. Educational Access Reform. The Muggle Studies Expansion. The integration requirement. The practical component. Not because Muggle culture is superior, because ignorance of it has been weaponized, repeatedly, by people who find that ignorance useful. We are done being useful to them. He pauses. Article 5. Azkaban Review. Dementor contracts not renewed. The prison rebuilt on human-staffed ministry standard conditions over 5 years. He looks at the chamber directly. Azkaban as it currently exists is not a justice mechanism. It is a cruelty mechanism. We do not need it. We have never needed it. We have used it because it was available, and because fear is easier than reform. That ends. He closes the folder he has not opened. The votes are there. 26. Confirmed. I've done the count, and I've done it correctly, and I would not be standing here if I hadn't. This is not a proposal. It is a presentation of what is already decided. I'm asking the chamber to formalize what we have already agreed to, because formalizing it is how it becomes real, and real is the only version that matters. He steps back from the stand. The discussion lasts 4 hours. Harry sits in the Potter seat and answers the questions directed at him with the economy he uses for everything. Minimum words, maximum information, no elaboration the question doesn't require. There are genuine objections and performed ones. The genuine objections. About implementation timelines. About transitional provisions in Article 5. About how the Article 1 abolition interacts with existing legal contracts that reference blood status. He answers with the specificity they deserve, because they are real problems that will produce real failures if ignored. He has planned for most of them. For 3 he hasn't. He commits to written answers within the week, and does not pretend otherwise. Because pretending would establish the wrong precedent for what the reform is supposed to be. An honest reconstruction, not a performance of one. The performed objections he answers with the same economy, and does not signal the distinction, because there is no advantage in making someone feel they have been caught. Lucius Malfoy speaks in favor of Article 4. He frames it as practical wisdom. The world is changing. Accommodation is not defeat. The sacred traditions endure within adaptive structures, and it is exactly the argument Harry would have suggested if Malfoy had asked, which he didn't, which means Malfoy arrived at it himself over the course of the briefing week. He does not look at Harry when he speaks. He doesn't need to. Augusta Longbottom speaks in favor of Article 5. Her voice, when she describes what Azkaban has done to people she knows personally, is the most unguarded thing Harry has heard in a Wizengamot chamber. She does not use political language. She uses her own words, which are the words of a woman who sat across from Frank and Alice Longbottom in St. Mungo's for 13 years and watched what remained of them occupy the space where they used to be, and who has been waiting for this chamber to say what she has always known, that a society calling this justice has made a mistake it cannot afford to keep making. The chamber is very still when she finishes. At 7:15, Griselda Marchbanks calls the vote. Article 1 passes, 32 to 19. Article 2 passes, 38 to 12, 1 abstention. Article 3 passes, 41 to 9, 1 abstention. Article 4 passes, 29 to 21, 1 abstention. The chamber goes quiet before Article 5, the quietest it has been all evening. Harry does not move. Article 5 passes, 26 to 23, 2 abstentions. The closest vote, the one that matters most. Griselda Marchbanks sets down her tally sheet, looks at the chamber. Then, at Harry. The Foundations Act, she says, is law. Harry does not react. He picks up his coat and walks out of the chamber into the corridor. The corridor is stone and torchlight in the specific quiet of a space adjacent to a room where something significant has just happened. He can hear, faintly, the business of the chamber continuing behind the closed doors, Marchbanks's voice giving the formal close, the sound of chairs, the procedural language that transforms a vote into a record, and a record into law. 6 years. The thought occupies approximately 1 second of his mind before he files it and moves on, because that is how he processes things that have concluded. It is enough to note the scale. It is not useful to dwell in it. Hermione is there. Notebooks under her arm, expression in the same careful neutrality as his. They look at each other. 26, she says. 26, he confirms. She opens her notebook to a fresh page. Implementation, she says. Implementation, he agrees. They walk toward the flue. Behind them, in the chamber, 51 people sit with the weight of what they have agreed to, and somewhere in the ministry archives a clerk is already beginning to process the paperwork that will, over the next decade, remake the foundation of a world that has been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for someone to hand it a better version of itself. The corridor is empty. The work begins now. Ministry of Magic, 3 years later. The ministry entrance hall is quiet at 8 in the morning. Not the quiet of absence. The building is already occupied. Clerks at their stations, interdepartmental memos beginning their paper airplane circuits through the atrium's upper air. But the quiet of a place that has not yet decided what kind of day it is. The fountain runs. The golden statues catch the light, different from the originals. The reform included the fountain, a detail Hermione insisted on and Harry agreed with. The old hierarchy of figures replaced with something more honest, more accurate, more reflective of what the wizarding world actually is, rather than what it told itself it was. Harry arrives at 8:15. He is 19 years old and has not grown dramatically taller since 14, but has grown into himself in the way that happens when the work matches the scale of what you are. A settling, a consolidation, the difference between a structure under construction and a structure complete and bearing load. He walks across the ministry seal without looking at it. He has been walking across it for 3 years and has never looked at it. Not because it doesn't interest him, but because looking at the floor is a posture, and postures are choices, and this one communicates the wrong thing. He carries a single folder. He is here for 2 meetings. He has been preparing for both of them, in various ways, for the better part of a decade. Hermione is already there. She is always already there. Voldemort's ministry office. 900 am. He has an office now. A room in the Ministry of Magic, standard dimensions, window overlooking the atrium, the desk positioned for authority rather than comfort. The ancient house's liaison, a role created after the Foundations Act with no exact precedent and therefore no exact limitation, which was the point. Harry held it for 8 months, then restructured it and handed the day-to-day function to Voldemort, which caused a reaction in the Wizengamot that took 3 weeks to fully subside, and which Hermione documented in her 6th notebook under the heading, "The week everyone remembered what patience costs." It works. That is the only metric Harry applies to arrangements. They cover the Goblin Co-Governance first report, Iron Scale's opening position stronger than projected, 4 centuries of waiting producing thorough preparation, then the Azkaban transition, 3 of 5 wings fully converted, Dementor relocation to the North Sea Sanctuary 70% complete. Any resistance? Voldemort asks. Formal resistance. None. Quiet resistance. In the form of 3 Wizengamot members who voted for Article 5, and have been hoping the implementation would stall. Harry closes the folder. It hasn't stalled. No, Voldemort says. It hasn't. The specific quality of these meetings, careful, sequential, mutually competent, is something Harry did not fully anticipate in the graveyard at 14. He anticipated the framework. He anticipated the political architecture. He did not anticipate what it would feel like to sit across a desk from Voldemort 3 years on and conduct a governance review with the efficiency of 2 people who have, without designing it this way, become something like colleagues. He has a word for it that he shared once with Hermione, at 2 in the morning in the 7th notebook alcove. The word is functional. It is not a warm word. It does not resolve the complexity of the relationship's history or its nature. It is the word that is accurate, and accuracy is the standard he applies. Then, there's something else, Voldemort says, when Harry reaches for his coat. He settles back. Waits. The Peverell question, Voldemort says. The Deathly Hallows. You have the cloak. The stone, which you recovered from the Gaunt Ring 2 years ago. The wand, you are, by every technical criterion, the master of death. You could. I know what I could do with them, Harry says. I chose not to. The wand is in Dumbledore's tomb, where I put it after the act passed. The stone is in a box in my office that I don't open. The cloak I use occasionally because it's practical. He looks at Voldemort directly. The Hollows are not a governance tool. They're a weight. The right thing to do with a weight you don't need is to set it down. Your grandfather's thinking, Voldemort says, not disparagingly. Observationally, Ignotus Peverell's thinking, Harry says. He understood something his brothers didn't, that the mastery that matters is knowing when the power is beside the point. A pause. The same thing applies to the fragment. Incidentally, I haven't removed it. I've changed its relationship to my core, made it stable, made it mine rather than its own thing. That is a different kind of mastery than the Hollows offer, and it is the kind that lasts. Voldemort is quiet for a moment. You've discussed this with Dumbledore. He raises it every month. We have arrived, over 3 years, at an agreement to disagree about my methods and an agreement to agree about the outcomes. Harry stands. He wanted to fix something he thought was broken. I didn't need it fixed. I needed it understood. Those are different interventions, and I was the only one positioned to know which was appropriate. He picks up his coat. The implementation review is complete, he says. Everything else is maintenance. I'll send you the quarterly projections by Friday. Harry, Voldemort says. He stops. This is one of the things that has not changed across 3 years. Voldemort says his name, and he stops. Not from obligation, but from the recognition that what follows is always worth hearing, which is the only reason Harry stops for anything. You are what I would have made, Voldemort says, if I had known what to make. Harry considers this for a long moment. I know, he says. That's why it works. He leaves. Ministry conference room, 10:30 am. The meeting with Dumbledore is in a small conference room on the 4th floor. Neutral in the specific way that Dumbledore's office is not neutral and Harry's office is not neutral. And neutral matters when the conversation is going to be honest. Dumbledore is already there. Tea on the table, 2 cups, poured before Harry arrived. He always does this. Harry has understood for 3 years that it is his version of saying, I have been thinking about this meeting before you walked in. They cover the implementation review, the Azkaban transition timeline, the ancient magic curriculum, running for 2 years now and exceeding every projection. Then, the Horcrux, Dumbledore says. Stable, monitored, as I told you last month. And the binding adjustment is holding, Harry says. The binding adjustment, the deliberate modification of the soul fragment's relationship to his own magical core, conducted over 6 months of theoretical work and practical application, documented in a notebook that lives in a warded case in Harry's office and has not been read by anyone else. Not removal, not suppression. A renegotiation of terms. The fragment is still there. It is no longer parasitic. The distinction matters enormously and is very difficult to explain to people who have not lived it. A pause. And Nagini, Dumbledore says. Still in Scotland, as far as anyone has observed. She hasn't been sighted in 3 years. You're certain she poses no threat. I'm certain the binding that made her one has been dissolved, Harry says. The Annam Salve technique, it separates an embedded soul fragment from a living host's consciousness, without destroying either. She is, as best I can determine, simply a very large snake living in the Scottish Highlands with no particular interest in human affairs. He sets down his tea. The technique took 2 years of development, 1 practical application, with Voldemort's consent in a field in Wiltshire. Hermione documented the process in full. If you'd like to review the documentation, I can arrange access. Dumbledore is quiet. With his cooperation, he says. You developed it with his cooperation. It was in his interest. Harry says. The fragment binding her to him was a liability. She was a vulnerability, not an asset. Anyone who knew about her knew where to apply pressure. Releasing her was a straightforward strategic decision once the technique existed. A brief pause. The 20 minutes she spent still after the dissolution, before she moved into the Highlands, I think she was simply deciding whether to go. Where? He picks up his tea again. She chose. That seemed right. Dumbledore wraps both hands around his teacup, the gesture he uses when he is about to say something he has prepared and is still uncertain about. Harry has catalogued it across 3 years of monthly meetings. I owe you an accounting, Dumbledore says. Harry waits. I made decisions about your life before you were old enough to have opinions about it, Dumbledore says. I made them because I believed they were necessary, and some of them were, and some were not, and I cannot reliably distinguish between them in retrospect, because I am not certain my judgment in those years was as sound as I believed it to be. He looks at Harry. The Dursleys. The plan I had for you. The assumptions about what you were for. I know, Harry says. I am not certain knowing is the same as accepting my account of it. It isn't, Harry says. But it's sufficient. He sets down his tea. You made the decisions you made with the information you had. Some were wrong. The wrong ones had consequences. We've both been living in those consequences for 3 years and building something better inside them. That's the accounting. Not what was done, but what's being done instead. Dumbledore is quiet for a long time. You are, he says finally, considerably more than I had any right to expect. I had good teachers, Harry says. More than one kind. Ministry Atrium, 12 p.m. He finds Bellatrix at the fountain at noon. She is not there for a meeting. She is there because Harry told her, 3 days ago, that today was the day the implementation review would be complete. The last accountability checkpoint before the framework became fully self-sustaining. And she said nothing and appeared at noon anyway. She looks exactly as she has always looked. Which is to say, she looks like someone who decided, at some point in the past, that the energy required to look like anything else is better spent on other things. She is standing at the edge of the fountain, with her arms folded, and her attention on the atrium's upper levels, reading the space out of habit, the way she has read every space she has ever occupied. Well, she says. Done, Harry says. She looks at him, at his face, which she has been reading since he was 3 years old, and can read now with the precision of a text she has memorized, but still finds worth returning to. Both meetings. Both meetings. The implementation review is complete. The reform is self-sustaining. It doesn't need us to maintain it anymore. It runs on its own architecture. And Dumbledore. We had the accounting conversation. He said what he needed to say. I said what was true. A pause. Was it enough? For what? For you. Harry considers this with the same seriousness he gives every genuine question. The atrium moves around them, memos in their circuits overhead, clerks crossing the seal, the fountain running, the ministry doing what the ministry does on an ordinary morning, in an ordinary week that is ordinary only because the work of the previous 6 years made it so. Yes, he says, it's enough. She looks at him a moment longer, then she turns and walks toward the Floo network, because Bellatrix does not linger in places once the significant moment has passed. The significant moment has passed. He watches her go. Ministry Atrium, 12:30 p.m. Hermione finds him at the fountain. She sits beside him on the fountain's edge, something she would not have done 3 years ago in a professional context. But 3 years of shared work has recalibrated the professional context into something that includes sitting on fountain edges, and opens her 7th notebook. What do we do now? She asks. Harry looks at the atrium, at the memos in their circuits and the clerks on their routes and the fountain's golden statues catching the light, at the ministry seal on the floor, which he has been walking across for 3 years without ever looking at it, and which he does not look at now either. Now, he says, we find out what's next. Hermione opens the notebook to a fresh page, writes at the top, what's next? Underlines it. I have some thoughts, she says. I know. Harry says. She has always had thoughts. 7 notebooks of them, organized by subject and cross-referenced by the specific precision that makes Hermione Granger's thinking not merely good but structurally sound. The kind of thinking that does not simply find answers but builds frameworks inside which future answers become possible. The reform is self-sustaining, but self-sustaining is not the same as finished. She knows that better than anyone. She has been watching the gap between what the law says and what people believe for 3 years, and she has been taking notes. He looks at the fresh page. What's next? Underlined once. He knows she has already begun. Outside, the wizarding world goes about its morning, different from the morning it would have been 6 years ago in ways visible if you know what to look at, and invisible if you don't. The blood status registry is gone. The Gringotts Co-Governance Council is in its 3rd year. The ancient magic curriculum runs in every year at Hogwarts. Azkaban is 3/5 rebuilt. 3 Wizengamot members who voted against Article 5 have quietly changed their position on the record. The specific political motion of people who have decided to be on the right side before the history is written rather than after. It is not a perfect world. Not a finished world. It has resistance in it. And friction. And the long complex work of changing what people believe rather than just what the law says, which is slower and harder and more important than anything that came before it. But the foundation is different, and foundations are where everything starts. Harry Potter, the boy who was supposed to die as an infant, raised in a dark house by dark people into something that exceeded every expectation anyone had for him in any direction, sits beside the fountain in the Ministry atrium and watches the world he helped build go about its morning. Behind him, his father's shadow is long. Ahead of him, the road is his own. He picks up his folder. He begins. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.